Hi guys and welcome back to a new video. My name is Martina and this is the Secret Craft Room. I've been wanting to make large glowing mushrooms for a long time and now I finally decided to make some. I also made this lantern for them completely from scratch. Please give my video a thumbs up and subscribe if you like my content. And without further ado, let's get into the video. The first thing I did was to make a sketch of the lantern and figure out how big I wanted it to be. Then I made a template for it in Photoshop. Next I cut out all the pieces for the base and the lid from thick cardboard. Then I glued small pieces of cardboard together to act as support for the base and also for the top piece. Then I glued everything together. Next I cut out strips of thin cardboard and glued it to the edges. To help support the top, I decided to use these wooden dowels. I made holes for them in the cardboard and then I glued them in place. Looking back, I wish I would have just glued them in place on top of the cardboard instead of in holes. Next I taped two strips of thin cardboard together and folded it along the middle to create a corner. Then I glued one in each of the corners of the lantern. Then I glued strips of thin cardboard along the lower and top edge of the lantern. Next I made the top part of the lantern by cutting out 6 pieces of this shape from thick cardboard. I drew lines between the corners so I knew where to glue the cardboard pieces. Next I cut out pieces from thin cardboard and bent them a little bit, and then I glued them to the top. I had to cut a few of them to make them fit properly. Then I used thick and thin cardboard to make a small piece to glue on top of the lantern. Next I covered the whole lantern with a layer of papier mache. I used old packing paper and a mixture of equal parts of water and PVA glue. At this point I realized that the dowels were in the way of creating the inner part, so I cut them off and glued them as close to the corners as possible. Then I cut strips of thin cardboard and glued it to the inside of the lantern. Then I covered this with papier mache as well. When completely dry, I covered the whole piece with spackle. And once the spackle was dry, I sanded it down as smooth as possible. Next I filled these molds with hot glue and glued it to the top of the lantern. I like to use hot glue in these instead of clay simply because the clay breaks when I try to use that. I also used 2 different border molds and added that to the lantern. For these I used air dry clay. I also used PVA glue to help the clay stick to the surface. Then I glued on thin strips of thin cardboard around the openings to create more detail there. Next I glued wooden beads to the bottom of the lantern and secured them with paper mache. I used toilet paper and my glue and water mix for this. Then I mixed black acrylic paint with Mod Podge and painted the whole piece with 2 layers of this, letting each layer dry in between. Then I painted the whole thing with dark brown paint. I made sort of a messy coat, letting the black still show at some parts. Then I dry brushed it with light brown paint. Dry brushing means that you wipe most of the paint off your brush so that it's almost dry. This is a great way to enhance details. It also makes it look sort of like wood. Next it was time to start working on the mushrooms. I created a base for it from aluminum foil. Then I covered the pieces in several layers of plastic wrap. Then I covered the top of them with hot glue. I used scissors to cut off the edge and make it neater. Then I did the same thing to create the feet for the mushrooms. I hung these from the plastic wrap at the top while the glue set. Then I filled in any holes with hot glue, and I also used the nozzle of the glue gun to smooth out the glue as much as possible. I decided to use glue sticks to hold the lights in the center of the mushrooms. For the larger mushrooms, I twisted the copper wire of the lights to get the lights closer to the wider edge. I used a total of 2 strings of lights for 5 mushrooms. I also chose to use remote controlled lights. Next I made the bottom of the mushroom hats. Then I glued everything together. Once the mushrooms were done, I glued them to a cardboard box so I could paint them more easily. I started by adding a layer of Mod Podge to each mushroom. Then I mixed a tiny bit of acrylic paint with Mod Podge to create a translucent paint. Then I painted the mushrooms with it. For the feet of the mushrooms I mixed Mod Podge with a tiny bit of beige and yellow paint. Next I used soft pastels to dirty the mushrooms a bit. To hide the battery packs, I glued a cardboard box at the bottom of the lantern. Then I glued the mushrooms in place inside the lantern. Next I painted the cardboard box green. And then lastly I glued on a lot of moss around the mushrooms. Please don't forget to subscribe and give my video a thumbs up if you liked it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.